Video lesson 5.6, Containment. So this video is going to kind of recap everything that we've learned that's happened in the Cold War so far and give you some more concrete terms to deal with especially when considering the essay that you're going to start writing next class. So I just want to reiterate in kind of a more visual fashion the maps that we looked at before winter break of the Soviet Union's expansion into Eastern Europe. So remember, we got north, south, east, and west. So I want you to keep your eye on the Soviet Union. Remember, this is March 1943. This is at the height of World War II. So you can see Germany still has power over France and over most of Eastern Europe. Then by August of 1943, the Soviet Union has taken a little bit more of Eastern Europe into its power as they push back the Germans. Same thing, January 1944, they're still pushing back those Germans. They're taking more and more of Eastern Europe. Here we go. They've already taken most of Ukraine. They've taken those Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those kind of countries over here. And they've kind of pushed the Germans out of their own territory, and they're pushing into Eastern Europe. Now we really see the Soviet kind of encroachment here. This is Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria are now part of the Soviet Union. And we see Germany getting smaller. We see by September, France has been taken back by the Allies as a kind of recap to the end of World War II. And then by March of 1945, Germany is almost being taken over by Russia itself. Same thing, these countries here are under Soviet control until finally, May of 1945, we have the end of the European theater. As you see here, April 30th, Adolf Hitler shoots himself. So Berlin, we can see, is totally surrounded by purple territory. But remember, Berlin's a city bigger than Washington, D.C. So half of this city will ultimately be controlled by the U.S., Britain, and France, and the other half will be controlled by the Soviet Union. So that's important for later on. So we can see the occupation of Berlin divided between allies. It's almost as if North Capitol Street, everything west of that in northwest and southwest, was owned by California, and the eastern part, northeast and southeast, were owned by Maryland and Virginia. And California was at war with Maryland and Virginia. Very, very tense situation there in Berlin. Likewise, Germany is divided up into those four parts at the Potsdam Conference. This little blue part goes to France, this pink part is for Great Britain, and the green part is for the United States. So again, the purple part is still part of the Soviet Union. But you can also see how much territory they gained in just those 2 years. So by August of 1945, basically by 1947, after the World War II is completely over, this is what we're looking at. So the US and British merged their occupation zones, so now we have Eastern Germany comprising its own country, as well as Western Germany basically comprising its own country, but really being a puppet state for the Soviets. Same thing, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Austria are still separate. Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Albania, all of these countries are separate, but they are controlled by the Soviet Union, more or less. So they are separate countries. They are not part of the USSR, but the Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are part of the USSR. But now, here's what's happening. 1946, we have a civil war breakout in Greece over communism. We have this development of the Iron Curtain here. Remember Trieste in the Adriatic? That's what he was talking about right here. And then there were from here, basically in Germany, all the way down, kind of splitting Europe in half. The eastern half over here, Soviet Union, communists. The western half over here, capitalists. They side with the United States. Alright, so we have that large territorial expansion here, so we'll just run through real quickly again visually. So starting at the beginning, we can see the purple get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until finally we're here. So how is Stalin stopped? So the weak countries in Eastern Europe quickly fall to communism. It is a better opportunity or a better ideology to raise the whole country up, because there were more people at the bottom that needed to be brought up and equalized with those at the top than there were in capitalist countries. Even the bottom in capitalist countries was still better than the bottom in those communist countries. So they saw communism as an opportunity to equalize everything after the destruction and the domination of World War II. However, we see this Iron Curtain start to emerge, and Churchill expresses his fear of danger and of communism in his Iron Curtain speech. He says, countries need to stop capitalism from spreading too much. So we need to work together to stop it from spreading. So here's just a little cartoon. But we can see all of this stuff. We need to contain communism into just these areas before Stalin can get any more. So the U.S. policy for the Cold War becomes known as containment. Stop the spread of communism by any means necessary all over the globe. So this is not just in Europe. So first we need to lock it up down here. We need to focus on the Middle East. We also need to focus on Asia, because remember, Russia has another side. We need to focus on Western Europe first. But then USSR doesn't have to just go where they're touching, right? So we need to focus on other areas of the world as well, which is what we'll be talking about in next unit. So the first part of containment is known as the Truman Doctrine. We introduced this a little bit in class today, but this was formed in 1947, named obviously after President Harry S. Truman. And when the USSR began to pressure Greece and Turkey to turn communist, the US created the Truman Doctrine, which promised economic and military help to any nation threatened by communism. So it wasn't just Greece and Turkey, but this started because Greece and Turkey needed the help first. So he said, if you're being threatened by communism, we'll give you some support to help fight that communist insurgency. And the reason this is called a doctrine is because this was kind of an overarching belief that the United States had during this time. So Congress appropriates $400 million in aid to Greece and Turkey in the form of military equipment. So it wasn't straight up bribing them with money, but it was $400 million that they could not spend on their own technology because they did not have that technology. So this method worked, and neither Greece or Turkey fell to communism. And we're going to also talk about the Marshall Plan. So the way I want you to remember what the Truman Doctrine was is the Truman starts with T, so does tank. So you can remember that it is military aid that was given to these countries. And you can even throw in Turkey there to remember that it was specifically given to Greece and Turkey. So once again, we can see the USSR is up here. These countries are all communist, and these countries are all communist. So you can see kind of the pincers here of that Soviet symbol and all of this aid that is given to Turkey specifically to help defend against the communist pressure. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the Marshall Plan, which also occurred in 1947. So Western European nations in particular had difficulty recovering after World War II, which led to fears of communism in Europe. So just like Eastern Europe was desperate, so that gave rise to the need for an economic system full of promise and strong leadership, i.e. communism. They thought, well, if Eastern Europe fell to that same ideology, maybe Western Europe will too in that same context. So to prevent this, let's just give them a whole bunch of money. So the U.S. created the Marshall Plan, which offered $13 billion total to help rebuild post-war Europe. And basically, like I said, if the idea was if weak nations are provided with money in order to rebuild, they won't need communism to get back on their feet. This plan also works. So these Western European countries, Greece and Turkey, are all kind of back on their feet, and that was at the action of the U.S. So they kind of owe it to the U.S. to be capitalist, as well as they don't need communism because they are no longer desperate. So the way I want you to remember this one is Marshall, starts with M, as does money, and I'm not sure what other M you can come up with, but remember Marshall Plan, money to Western Europe. All right. The NATO, or North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed in 1948 between Great Britain, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, the Republic of Germany, which is also known commonly as West Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Turkey, Greece, US, and Canada. So basically, it's these yellow countries here. So Western Germany, kind of split right down the Iron Curtain there, including Greece and Turkey, because remember, the Truman Doctrine worked, so they were capitalist again. And the other North Atlantic countries of the United States and Canada. And as you read in class, they agreed that an attack against one should be considered an attack against them all, and that the others should take necessary actions in response to such attack. So if one of them got attacked, they all would respond to that person or to that attack. So let's say, for example, Poland attacks West Germany, or East Germany attacks West Germany. Italy, France, Belgium, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Norway, US, Portugal, Canada all responds and attacks East Germany in retaliation. Because of this, later in 1948, the Warsaw Pact is formed in response to NATO. So they wanted to create kind of a buffer zone. They wanted to solidify those alliances and create this buffer zone along the Iron Curtain to guard against direct Soviet or democratic friction. And so they agreed that member states would protect each other in the event of an attack from a non-member state, just like NATO did, except their members are the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and of course, the Soviet Union. All right, now, those are kind of the diplomatic tensions that occur, diplomatic things that come out of this Cold War context. In particular, the United States really takes on this culture of paranoia, not only with the arms race and space race, but with the creation of several new government agencies, including the CIA, which you may know is the Central Intelligence Agency, and the NSC, which also, as you may know, is the National Security Council. So the CIA is an independent agency. Well, it's not independent, it's still part of the federal government, but it is specifically in charge of intelligence abroad. So basically, when you think of like spies and those kinds of things, that is the CIA that is doing this. So the CIA collects intelligence on Soviets, American citizens, possible communist activity around the world. So let's say there's an independent country in Latin America. The CIA might be sent down there to figure out who's communist, how do we eliminate this communist problem, etc. But they were top secret. And the National Security Council organizes and advises on this information to the president to protect against communism and better implement containment. So they are specifically an advisory council to the president. So what policies should be made based on this intelligence that is collected by the CIA. So these two organizations work very closely together. Now, just as a reminder, the USSR is communist, which is totalitarian, and they already had a similar agency, which is known as the KGB, which you may have heard of before. The KGB was Stalin's secret foreign and domestic police force. So not only did they do the job of the CIA and the NSC, they also did the job of the FBI, except it was top secret. So you didn't know who was a KGB agent, and they might be collecting information on you secretly as a Russian citizen. All right, so things sort of come to a head here, which is what ultimately leads to the formation of the Berlin Wall. But this is one of our closest points we were to actually going to war with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. So as I mentioned, Germany is divided into West, Allied-controlled Germany, and East Germany, which is Soviet-controlled. Berlin is also split, but remember, it is maintained within all of East Germany. In 1948, however, Stalin tried to turn all of Berlin communist and ordered the Berlin Blockade, which shut down all ground transportation to West Berlin, thereby cutting off supplies to Allied-occupied West Berlin. So basically, or West Germany, that should say. So West Berlin got all of its supplies from Western Germany because they were the capital of Western Germany, even though they weren't in Western Germany. So in order to get any supplies, they needed to go to and from and through East Germany. So Stalin basically blocks everything around this and completely lays siege to this city. So what the Allies do in response is the Berlin airlift. So for 11 months, the US and British planes supplies landed in Berlin to bring food, fuel, and supplies. So basically, these planes literally dropped things over West Berlin so that the West Berlin people could have their supplies that they needed. Finally, after 11 months, Stalin admitted defeat and lifted the blockade in 1949. So this is kind of the touchstone of like Stalin's going to do this finally to make the US declare war on them, or to have even more power in Germany and Europe. And they were unsuccessful. So now we're just kind of at a standstill with the US and USSR. So I want you to keep all of these events in mind as you think about who is to blame for the Cold War in general. Our next unit, we're going to get more in depth into how this affects other countries in the world.